what's up? So, welcome back to this very useful channel, the one and only Artificial and Facts. So, today we will talk about application, the cost of taxation. Before we jump to the material, I would like to ask all of you a question. Have you ever imagined what condition would be in developing countries if tax were abolished? Yes, we will face various obstacles when the tax is not applied. Tax is one of the sources of income for the state. Therefore, if the tax is not applied, we can imagine how big the loss will be for the state. One source of funds from community service activities carried out by the government, such as repairing public facilities, assistance or subsidies to the community, comes from tax. When the state does not levy tax, the service can be hampered and can even cause the state debt to increase. So, will you live without tax? I hope your answer is no, considering how difficult it would be for us to live if the government didn't implement tax. So on this video, we will talk about the tax definition, tax function, the effect of tax, how tax affects the market, how tax affects welfare, and last but not least, the tweak loss and tax revenue as tax vary. We've been talking about tax all this time without knowing what tax are. So basically, tax are levies paid by the people to the government. For the example, the imposition of tax on goods or service. The imposition of tax will increase the price of the goods or service themselves. Next, we will talk about the function of tax. We have four functions of tax. First, budget function or budgetary. As a source of state revenue, tax function to finance state expenditures. To carry out routine tasks of the state and carry out development, the state needs money. This fee can be obtained from tax revenue. Today, tax are used for routine financing such as personal expenditure, goods expenditures, maintenance, and so on. For development financing, money is removed from government savings, namely domestic revenue, minus routine expenditures. This government savings from year to year must be increased according to the increasing need for development financing, and this is mainly expected from the tax sector. Second, we have function set or regularian. The government can regulate economic growth through tax policy. With the function of regulating, tax can be used as a tool to achieve goals. For example, in the context of driving investment, both domestically and abroad, various tax relief facilities are provided. In order to protect domestic production, the government imposed high import duties on foreign products. The third is stability function. With the tax, the government has the funds to carry out policies related to the price stability so that inflation can be controlled. This can be done, among others, by regulating the circulation of money in the community, tax collection, effective and efficient use of tax. And the fourth is income redistribution function. Tax that have been collected by the state will be used to finance all public interests, including also to finance development, so as to open up job opportunities, which in turn will increase people's income. So on this video, we will have a quick quiz, so you guys can answer it in the chat box. For the first question, What do you think will happen if the state does not impose tax? Explain from your side as a consumer. You guys have 3 minutes to answer it. It starts from 3, 2, 1. So now we will talk about the effect of tax. A tax levied on a good or service creates a space between what the seller has to pay and what the buyer receives. So from this curve we can see the quantity before the tax apply is nor higher than the quantity with tax, and the price before tax apply is the equilibrium price. Now, let's go to the quiz 2. The question is, what caused the quantity of goods sold to decrease as on the curve? Explain. You guys still have 3 minutes to answer it. It starts from 3, 2, 1. Okay guys, thank you for all your answer. Good job guys. And now we will move on to how tax affect the market. The profit earned by sellers in a market is measured by producer surplus, namely the price that sellers receive for an item minus the cost of production. The income from tax collected by the government can be compared to T, which is the tax rate, and Q, which is the number of goods sold. So the government income from tax is T multiplied by Q, or equal to the area of rectangle between the supply and demand curve. You guys can see the rectangle in the tax revenue curve. The government can use this tax revenue to provide service to the community, such as road construction, police service, and public education, or to help people in need. Therefore, to analyze how tax affect the state of the economy, we use tax revenue to measure the government profit from tax. However, remember that the real profit goes not to the government, but to the people for whom the government tax revenue are spent. Next, we'll talk about how tax affect welfare. From this graph, we can see that a triangular shaped building called DWL, or deadweight loss, is a loss of raw material caused by tax. So from this curve, we know that the key one is the quantity before tax apply, and the key two is the quantity after the tax apply. Price buyers pay is known as PB, and the price without tax is known as PE, and the price sellers receive is known as PS. It's quiz time, guys. So the third question is, what happens to customer and producer surplus when the sale of a good is taxed? How change in consumer and producer surplus compared to the tax revenue? Explain it. Still the same, you have 3 minutes to answer it on the chat box. It starts from 3, 2, 1. tax by comparing welfare before and after the tax is enacted. The third column of the table in the video shows the change. The tax causes consumer surplus to fall by the area B plus C and producer surplus to fall by the area D plus E. Tax revenue rises by the area B plus D. Not surprisingly, the tax makes buyers and sellers worse off and the government better off. The change in total welfare includes the change in consumer surplus, which is negative, the change in producer surplus, which is also negative, and the change in tax revenue, which is positive. When we add these three pieces together, we find that total surplus in the market falls by the area C plus E. Thus, the losses to buyers and sellers from a tax exceed the revenue raised by the government. The fall in total surplus that results when a tax or some other policy distorts a market outcome is called the deadweight loss. The area C plus E measures the size of deadweight loss. So for the consumer surplus when without tax, the area is A plus B plus C. But after with tax, the area is only on A area. On the producer surplus, before the tax apply, the area is D plus E plus F. But after the tax apply, the area is only F. Tax revenue area when the tax apply is B plus D. For the total surplus, before the tax apply is A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F area. After with tax, the area is only A plus B plus D and plus F. Yay, it's quiz time again. So for the fourth quiz, the question is, who bears the tax burden? How to determine which party bears more tax? Still the same guys, you still have 3 minutes to answer it. It starts from 3, 2, 1. which party bear more tax, we use the elasticity of demand and supply. Before that, we must know what is elasticity. Basically, elasticity is how big the response of buyers and sellers to change in the price of goods and services. So, how does the elasticity of supply affect the size of the deadweight clause? If demand is more inelastic than supply, the buyer will bear more of the tax burden. The price paid by buyer is PB and the price received by the seller is PS. The tax borne by the seller is B and the tax borne by the buyer is A area. If demand is more elastic than supply, the tax burden borne by the seller will be greater than the borne by the buyer. If supply is more inelastic than demand, the tax burden is heavier on the seller than on the buyer. The tax borne by the buyer is on A area, and the tax borne by the seller is on B area. On the other hand, if supply is more elastic than demand, the tax burden is heavier on buyers than on sellers. Now we come to the fifth quiz. The rules still the same, guys. You still have 3 minutes to answer it on chat box. So the question is, how do the elasticity of supply and demand affect the deadweight clause of a tax? Why do they have this effect? You can answer it. Start from 3, 2, 1. now we come to the last part of this video at deadweight clause and tax revenue as tax vary. So, a deadweight clause is a societal cost incurred as a result of market inefficiency which arises when supply and demand are out of balance. Deadweight clause is primarily utilized in the economics, but it can be applied to any shortcoming created by inefficient resource allocation. Deadweight clause can be caused by price ceiling, such as price restriction and rent control, price floors, such as minimum wage and living wage regulation and taxation. With weaver trade opportunity, a society resource allocation may become inefficient. The Deadweight loss of taxation refers to the amount of money lost as a result of a new tax. This is due to a new tax that is higher than what is generally paid to the taxing body of the government. According to this hypothesis, introducing a new tax or raising an existing one can backfire, resulting in insufficient of no revenue gains for the government due to a drop in demand for the goods or service tax. As a result, a deadweight loss throws the supply-demand equation off. Alfred Marshall, an English economist, is largely acknowledged as the inventor of deadweight loss analysis. Deadweight loss, or excess burden, can be defined as the implied loss associated with imposing a tax that is above the amount of tax paid to the government. This deadweight loss occurs because tax distort choice and steer resources away from their highest and best use, leaving people worse off than they would be in absence of the tax. Taxes are imposed by government to raise revenue. These contributions go for infrastructure, economic help, and social service, among other things. To make up revenue shortfalls, federal, state, and municipal government frequently elect to raise tax. Although it may appear to be a good idea, it frequently has the opposite impact. A deadweight clause of taxation, or simply a deadweight clause, is what this is known as. How? This is how it goes. The government collects greater income when it raises tax on particular goods and services. Tax, on the other hand, raises the cost of manufacturing and consumers' buying price. As a result, production level and the supply decrease, resulting in a decrease in demand for these goods and services. The deadweight clause is the difference between tax and tax-free production volumes. Well, we already faced the 5 quiz and now we come to the 6th quiz, and the question is, what is the deadweight clause of a tax? What factor determine the size of deadweight clause? You still have 3 minutes, guys, to answer it in the chat box, and it starts from 3, 2, 1. Okay, for example, consider a consumer who buys avocado every week at the grocery store. When avocados cost $2, the consumer purchases 5 for $10. If the government imposed a tax of 50 cents per avocado, the consumer would face the higher cost of $2.50 per avocado, and we would expect the consumer to reduce the number of avocados purchased. Here the consumer is made worse off by two amounts: the tax revenue transferred to the government and the welfare loss due to the reduced consumption. A tax on a good reduces the welfare of buyers and sellers of the good, and the reduction in consumer and producer surplus usually exceeds the revenue raised by the government. The fall in total surplus, the sum of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and tax revenue, is called the deadweight loss of the tax. Let's take a look. In panel A, the supply curve is relatively inelastic. Quantity supply responds only slightly to change in the price. In panel B, the supply curve is relatively elastic. Quantity supply responds substantially to change in the price. Notice that the deadweight loss, the area of the triangle between the supply and demand curve, is larger when the supply curve is more elastic. Here the supply curve and the size of the tax are held constant. In panel C, the demand curve is relatively inelastic and the deadweight loss is small. In panel D, the demand curve is more elastic and the deadweight loss from the tax is larger. In panels A and B, the demand curve and the size of the tax are the same, but the price elasticity of supply is different. Notice that the more elastic the supply curve, the larger the deadweight loss of the tax. In panels C and D, the supply curve and the size of tax are the same, but the price elasticity of demand is different. Notice that the more elastic and demand curve, the larger the deadweight loss of the tax. The lesson from this figure is easy to explain. A tax has a deadweight loss because it induces buyers and sellers to change their behavior. The tax raises the price paid by buyers, so they consume less. At the same time, the tax lowers the price received by sellers, so they produce less. Because of this change in behavior, the size of the market shrinks below the optimum. The elasticities of supply and demand measure how much sellers and buyers respond to the change in the price and therefore determine how much the tax distorts the market outcome. Hence, the greater the elasticities of supply and demand, the greater the deadweight loss of a tax. For example, suppose that Will is a cleaner who is working in the cleaning service company, and Amy hires Will to clean her room every week for $100. The opportunity cost of Will's time is $80, while the value of a clean house to Amy is $120. Hence, each of them get same amount of benefit from their deal. Amy and Will each receive a benefit of $20, making the total surplus from trade $40. However, if the government were to decide to impose a $50 tax upon the providers of cleaning service, their trade would no longer benefit them. Amy would not be willing to pay any price above $120, and Will would no longer receive a payment that exceeded his opportunity cost. As a result, not only do Amy and Will both give up the deal, but Amy has to live in a dirtier house, and Will does not receive his desired income. They have thus lost amount of the surplus that they would have received from their deal, and at the same time, this made each of them worth of the tune of $40 in value. Government revenue is also affected by this tax, since Amy and Will have abandoned the deal. The government also lost any tax revenue that would have resulted from wage. This $40 is referred to as the deadweight loss. It's quiz time. So for the seventh question is, the demand for A product is more elastic than the demand for B product. Would a tax on beer or a tax on milk have a larger deadweight loss? Why? Still the same, you have 3 minutes to answer it on chat box. It starts from 3, 2, 1, go. Differing deadweight clause affect total tax revenue. Differing deadweight clause from a tax also affect the government total tax revenue. Tax revenue represented by the area of the rectangle between the supply and demand curve that I have mentioned before. When a low tax is levied, tax revenue is relatively small. As the size of the tax increases, tax revenue expands. However, when a much higher tax is levied, tax revenue eventually decreases. The higher tax reduces the total size of the market. Although taxes are taking a larger slice of the pie, the total size of the pie is reduced. Just as in the nail example above, beyond a certain point, the market for a good will eventually decrease to zero. Who bears the burden of this load is determined by the relative flexibility of producer and consumer in the market. Consumer, for example, will carry a bigger part of the tax burden if they are less responsive to price change than producer, that is, if consumers are more ready to accept a price hike. In contrast, the more sensitive a market member is to price change, the less likely they are to tolerate an excessive tax burden. The long-run burden of the corporate income tax, which is borne primarily by the least movable or responsive factor in the economy, typical worker, is a good example of this. Workers are often unable to pick up and relocate as easily if a company decides to invest elsewhere due to corporate income tax, perhaps as a result of customers choosing to buy from a competitor. If a tax rate is twice, the deadweight clause quadruples, implying that the extra burden will grow at a higher rate than revenue growth. It's critical to evaluate not only the revenue change that a tax increase would bring, but also the increased deadweight loss that a tax increase would bring. Deadweight loss effects show why, rather than pursuing high tax rates that causes disproportionately high economic costs, policymakers should pursue a more efficient tax code to achieve distributional goals. Rather than raising income tax rates to greater levels, policies such as extending the base, lowering rates, and limiting deduction and exclusion would result in reduced economic inefficiency. If policymakers determine that additional revenue is required, they should assess the deadweight clause associated with various tax policy options. The 8th quiz. The question is, if the government doubles the tax on gasoline, can you be sure that revenue from the gasoline tax will rise? Can you be sure that the deadweight clause from the gasoline tax will rise? Explain. Still the same, guys. You still have 3 minutes to answer it on chat box. It starts from 3, 2, 1. wage or deadweight clause is depicted graphically in the picture below, where the purple triangle represents the tax wage. The consumer demand curve is shown as a downward sloping blue line, whereas the producer supply curve is shown as an upward sloping yellow line. Where these two lines meet without a tax, the market clearing price and quantity of the good would occur. The application of a tax, on the other hand, means that the consumer will pay more for the commodity and the producer will receive less for the good and fewer goods will be sold. The tax wage is the difference between these two scenarios or the activity that does not occur. How to raising or lowering tax? The tax rarely stays the same for long periods of time. Policymakers in local, state, and federal government are always considering raising one tax or lowering another. The deadweight clause, the reduction in total surplus that results when the tax reduces the size of a market below the optimum, equals the area of the triangle between the supply and demand curve. Taxes have deadweight clauses because they cause buyers to consume less and sellers to produce less, and this change in behavior shrinks the size of the market below the level that maximizes total surplus. Because the elasticities of supply and demand measure how much market participants respond to market conditions, larger elasticities imply larger deadweight clause. In it, the deadweight clause of a tax rises even more rapidly than the size of tax. This occurs because the deadweight clause is an area of a triangle, and the area of a triangle depends on the square of its size. As a tax grows larger, it distorts incentive more, and its deadweight clause grows larger. Because a tax reduces the size of the market, however, tax revenue does not continually increase. It first rises with the size of a tax, but if a tax gets large enough, tax revenue starts to fall. Here we consider what happened to the deadweight clause and tax revenue when the size of a tax changes. It's quiz 9. So the question is, what happens to the deadweight clause and tax revenue when a tax is increased? 3 minutes from now. 3, 2, 1. You said never let me go. 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 You said never let me go.
said never let me go. You 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 said
The government tax revenue is the size of the tax times the amount of the good sold. As the first three panels of the figure show, tax revenue equals the area of the rectangle between the supply and demand curve. For the small tax in panel A, tax revenue is small. As the size of a tax increases from panel A to panel B, tax revenue grows, but as the size of the tax increases further from panel B to panel C, tax revenue falls because the higher tax drastically reduces the size of the market. For a very large tax, no revenue would be raised because people would stop buying and selling the good altogether. The last two panels of the figure summarize the result. In panel D, we see that as the size of a tax increases, its deadweight clause quickly gets larger. By contrast, in panel E show that the tax revenue first rises when the size of the tax, but as the tax gets larger, the market shrinks so much that the tax revenue starts to fall. Here we have seen that when the government imposed tax on buyers or sellers of a good, society lost some of the benefit of market efficiency. Taxes are costly to market participants, not only because tax transfer resources from those participants to the government, but also because they alter intensive and distort market outcomes. Good job, guys! You're amazing. You already passed the 9 quiz, and now we are already in 10 quiz. So the question of the 10 quiz or the last quiz is: when the government imposed tax on buyers or sellers of a good, society lose some of the benefits of market efficiency. Why? Still same, guys, you still have 3 minutes to answer it on chat box. It starts from 3, 2, 1. Good luck! Thank you for answering the all quick quiz. And now we face the problem and application for this chapter. So, suppose that a market is described by the following supply and demand equation. The quantity supply is equals to 2P and the quantity demand is equals to 300 minus P. A. Solve for the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. B. Suppose that a tax of T is placed on buyers, so the new demand equation is quantity demand equals to 300 minus P plus T. Solve for the new equilibrium. What happens to the price received by sellers, the price paid by buyers, and the quantity sold? C. Tax revenue is T multiplied by Q. Use your answer to part B to solve for tax revenue as a function of T. Draw a graph for this relationship between T in 0 and 300. D. The deadweight loss of a tax is the area of the triangle between the supply and demand curve. Recalling that the area of a triangle is half multiplied by base multiplied by height, solve for deadweight loss as a function of T. Graph this relationship for T between 0 and 300. And for the hint, looking sideways, the base of the deadweight loss triangle is T and the height is the difference between the quantity sold with the tax and quantity sold without the tax. Last but not least, E. The government now levies a tax on this good of $200 per unit. Is it a good policy? Why or why not? Can you propose a better policy? For the A answer, first we setting quantity supply equal to quantity demand give 2P equals to 300 minus P. Adding P to both sides of the equation gives 3P equals to 300. Dividing both sides by 3 gives P equals to 100. Plugging P equals 100 back into either equation for quantity demand or supply, give Q equals to 200. For the B answer, now P is the price received by sellers and P plus T is the price paid by buyers. Equating quantity demand to quantity supply give 2P equals to 300 minus P plus T. Adding P to both sides of the equation gives 3P equals to 300 minus T. Dividing both sides by 3 gives P equals to 100 minus T divided by 3. This is the price received by sellers. The buyers pay a price equal to the price received by sellers plus the tax. P plus T equals to 100 plus 2T divided by 3. The quantity sold is now is Q equals to 2P equals to 200 minus 2T divided by 3. Since the tax revenue is equal to T multiplied by Q and the Q is equals to 200 minus 2T divided by 3, tax revenue equals to 200T minus 2t squared divided by 3. The figure below show a graph of this relationship. Tax revenue is 0 at t equals to 0 and at t equals to 300. And for the D answer, as the figure below show, the area of the triangle laid on its side that represent the deadweight clause is half multiplied by base multiplied by height, where the base is the change in the price, which is the size of the tax, or T, and the height is the amount of the decline in quantity, that is 2t divided by 3. So the deadweight clause equals to half multiplied by t multiplied by 2t divided by 3 equals to t squared divided by 3. This rises exponentially from 0 when the t is equals to 0 to 45 hundredths when the t is equals to 300 as shown as the next figure. Plus, for the answer of the E part, a tax of $200 per unit is a bad idea because it is in a region in which tax revenue is declining. The government could reduce the tax to $115 per unit to get more tax revenue. $15,000 when the tax is $150 versus $13,333 when the tax is $200, and reduce the deadweight clause $7,500 when the tax is $150 compared to $13,333 when the tax is $200. So the conclusion of this video is, at the end of this video, basically microeconomists study how best to design a tax system, including how to strike the right balance between equality and efficiency. Macroeconomists study how tax influence the overall economy and how policymakers can use the tax system to stabilize economic activity and to achieve more rapid economic growth. So don't be surprised that as you continue your study of economics, the subject of taxation comes up yet again. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for all of your nice attention. If you like this video, please give some likes, comment, and subscribe. Eating bakwan with sayur kol. Thank you, and I love you all.